The Los Angeles Sparks, a franchise that many people had considered out of the spotlight over the past few years, are now reportedly making a determined and aggressive effort to bring Caitlin Clark away from the Indiana Fever. Leading that effort is Lynne Roberts, the Sparks' new head coach, who spent the last 9 years building a highly successful program at Utah before deciding to take on her next challenge at the professional level. And at the center of that conversation is Caitlin Clark. This is not a rumor. It is not a fan theory put together in a late-night Reddit discussion. It is a story involving real people and real conversations. And the reason it continues gaining momentum is simple. If you have been paying close attention to everything Caitlin Clark has gone through this season, the idea of her leaving Indiana for Los Angeles no longer feels like an unrealistic fantasy. Instead, it is beginning to look like the most logical outcome of a story that has only become more complicated with each passing week. So, let's go through all of it. Let's take a closer look at what the Los Angeles Sparks are doing behind the scenes. Let's examine how Stephanie White's coaching decisions are being viewed from the outside. Let's discuss what many believe this league has continued to allow to happen to its biggest star, game after game. And finally, let's explore why, for the first time, a growing number of people are seriously asking whether the Indiana Fever have truly earned the right to keep Caitlin Clark at all. Lynne Roberts is not a first-year coach who simply happened to land a job in a major market. She spent 9 seasons at Utah, turning the program into a consistent NCAA tournament contender and earning a reputation as one of the most respected program builders in women's basketball. The Los Angeles Sparks brought her in to accomplish something many people had stopped expecting from the franchise: to compete at a high level again. And Roberts has shown no interest in taking a slow approach. Since arriving in Los Angeles, she's been aggressive in every area. She signed Kate Martin, whose strong on-court chemistry with Caitlin Clark began at Iowa, and converted Martin's development contract into a standard WNBA contract in early July. She also added Kiana Williams to the roster. Roberts has been open about her ambitions, making it clear that the Sparks are building towards something meaningful. But she is not just searching for another talented player. She wants a true superstar, the type of player who can transform the future of a franchise both on the court and off it. And when you are the head coach of the Los Angeles Sparks looking at Caitlin Clark's current situation, it is easy to understand why many would see it as a rare opportunity. Here is what makes the situation seem like more than simple wishful thinking. The Sparks did not sign Kate Martin by accident. Martin was Caitlin Clark's teammate at Iowa and was part of every step of that historic journey. She is someone Clark already knows well, someone who understands her style of play before they would even share a practice floor. From this perspective, signing Kate Martin in the middle of the WNBA season appears to be more than just an ordinary roster move. It can be viewed as a deliberate organizational signal. The idea is to build a roster that Clark could step into and immediately feel comfortable with. It is about reducing obstacles and putting the right pieces in place before any potential negotiations could even begin. Lynne Roberts has never stood at a press conference and declared that the Sparks are pursuing Caitlin Clark. That is simply not how these situations usually unfold. But to many observers, the organization's moves are telling a story that the words have not yet expressed. And anyone following the Sparks closely can understand the direction they appear to be heading. Before you can understand why the Los Angeles Sparks would want Caitlin Clark so badly, you first have to understand what she is doing in the 2026 season. Through 17 appearances, she is averaging a career-high 21.2 points per game. She has earned another All-Star selection, giving her 3 All-Star appearances in her first 3 professional seasons. The Indiana Fever entered this stretch with an 11-8 record. At just 24 years old, Clark is performing at a level that places her in a conversation very few guards in the history of women's basketball have ever reached. She has become the most-watched player in the history of women's professional basketball. The Fever vs. Liberty matchup on June 6 averaged 2.557 million viewers on CBS, making it the most-watched WNBA game on any network during the 2026 season and the second most-watched women's basketball game on any network since 2000. Let's begin with the Portland Fire game on May 31st. During the first quarter, Stephanie White took Caitlin Clark out of the game, and the Fever eventually suffered a 100-84 loss. It was a 16-point defeat. Then, during a second-quarter timeout, television cameras captured what appeared to be a heated exchange between Clark and White. Clark was visibly frustrated, while White was making her point. The moment spread across social media almost immediately because fans across the country were watching a head coach and her franchise player appear to disagree on national television. When reporters later asked White about the early substitution, her explanation did not fully satisfy many observers. She pointed to Aaliyah Boston's minutes restriction and said Clark's substitution had been part of the game plan. Even so, removing your best player and most important offensive weapon in the first quarter of a game that ends in a 16-point loss is the kind of decision that naturally leads to further questions. After the game, both Clark and White insisted there was no problem. They described the exchange as competitive and simply part of coaching. But for many people, that explanation did not erase what they had already seen. The video was out there. Millions watched it. And the question it raised continued to linger. Is Stephanie White truly putting Caitlin Clark in the best position to succeed? And this was never just a one-game story. Before the latest incident, Clark had already been listed as probable for 13 different games this season because of a recurring back issue. 13 games. At just 24 years old, During what should be the strongest physical years of her career, she had already spent more than half the season dealing with injury concerns. Then came the June 24th matchup between the Fever and the Mercury. During a scramble for a loose ball, Alyssa Thomas appeared to make contact with Clark's throat using a closed fist. After the play, Thomas stood up, looked down at Clark, and stepped over her. The officials did not penalize the play, and the game continued. Following the game, Stephanie White described the missed calls as egregious. She said Clark absorbed 2 uncalled cheap shots in the same game, while the officials still chose to review Clark for possible contact against a defender instead of focusing on what had happened to her. The league later suspended Thomas for 1 game. Clark then missed the next 2 games after her back injury was aggravated during that same matchup. Here is where the story moves beyond ordinary basketball debate. According to this account, Sirit Soh at The Ringer argued that the league has been stacked against Caitlin Clark, that some players resent her, that officials have not done enough to protect her, and that league leadership has been reluctant to acknowledge what he viewed as obvious mistreatment. That is not simply the opinion of a fan on social media. It is the perspective of a journalist covering the WNBA for a well-known national sports publication. The discussion expanded even further when a group of 11 Republican lawmakers, led by U.S. Representative August Pfluger of Texas, sent a letter to WNBA Commissioner Cathy Engelbert on July 7th, calling for accountability over what they described as multiple incidents involving Clark. They referred to her as the face of the league and cited plays involving hip checks, contact to the eye, and the throat incident as examples of unnecessary physical hostility. The letter also stated that, if warranted, the matter could involve further legal review, and it requested a response from Commissioner Engelbert by July 24th. At that point, the conversation had moved well beyond basketball itself. It had become a national discussion about player safety and the league's responsibility to protect one of its biggest stars. And then, in the middle of all that discussion, another opinion added even more fuel to the debate. A Yahoo Sports article published in late June argued that the WNBA would ultimately be better off without Caitlin Clark. The reasoning was that Clark had already accomplished what she needed to accomplish. According to that viewpoint, she helped accelerate the league's growth, contributed to momentum behind charter flights for players, increased television ratings, and played a major role in the league's new collective bargaining discussions. The argument concluded that the WNBA should now be able to stand on its own instead of depending so heavily on the popularity of a single player. To many fans and commentators, however, that was one of the most controversial opinions in recent sports media. The idea that a league could be better off without its most watched and biggest drawing star sparked immediate debate. And once again, the conversation centered on Caitlin Clark. Here is the contract situation because it plays an important role in this conversation. Before the season even began, the Indiana Fever exercised their team option on Caitlin Clark's contract for the 2027 season, securing her at a salary of $597,596 for that year. Once the 2027 season ends, she will become a restricted free agent. That means Indiana will have the right to match any contract offer she receives from another team, but it does not prevent other franchises from making those offers. Because of that, many around the league are already looking toward 2028 as the first realistic opportunity for a major move. The long-term planning, championship ambitions, and public messaging from interested teams can all be viewed as preparation for that moment. Throughout it all, Clark has remained careful with her public comments. She has not criticized the Fever. She has not publicly challenged the front office or the coaching staff. She has continued to conduct herself as a professional. At the same time, she is a 24-year-old player who has spent 3 seasons in a league where many believe she has too often been left unprotected or forced to deal with repeated physical play. Meanwhile, the Los Angeles Sparks continue building a picture of what another future could look like. Clark stood in front of the cameras after returning to practice and spoke plainly. She said the league needs to do a better job of protecting its players. She also said that officiating needs to improve. At the same time, she condemned the harassment directed at other WNBA players in the aftermath of the controversy. That is Caitlin Clark. Even while recovering from an injury and missing games, she delivered a message that was measured, balanced, and professional. Meanwhile, many believe the league is still struggling to meet its own responsibility. Clark continues to show up whenever she is on the floor. She continues averaging more than 21 points per game. She continues filling arenas and driving television ratings to levels the WNBA had never experienced before her arrival. Her focus has always been on winning. And from this perspective, the quickest path to winning in the WNBA runs through Caitlin Clark. Lynne Roberts understands that. The Los Angeles Sparks understand that. And if the Indiana Fever and the league fail to recognize that their own decisions could encourage other teams to pursue her, they may eventually learn that lesson the hard way. A franchise that does not make its biggest star feel like a priority should not be surprised if another organization chooses to do exactly that.